So Jake Tapper is now trying to make the rounds, trying to convince the public that he was not aware of Joe Biden actually having a cognitive decline. And it's pretty incredible because when you look at what he said in the past versus what he's saying now is completely in contradiction. But essentially what I believe he's trying to do is he's trying to convince the American people that he still has credibility. And he's trying to demonstrate a way in which himself and a lot of the other mainstream media hosts could have missed Joe Biden's cognitive decline, even though 99% of Americans saw it in real time and called it out. Well, I guess I can't say 99% of Americans, but a large portion of Americans saw it, including, Fox News. It was just, ironically, MSNBC, CNN, all of the left-wing media agencies that missed it. They just could not. They just had that massive big blind spot. But now you have Jake Tapper trying to convince the American people.
That's cabinet secretary.
How it's even in the realm of possibility that he could have missed Joe Biden's decline. Like here. And this is, of course, to sell his new book, which is about Joe Biden's administration. And a big part of this is, what happened with his decline and whatnot. Now he's the expert. The one who could not recognize it to begin with is now the expert, which is hilarious. But now that he's a book salesman, Jake Tapper has all sorts of excuses. And one of these excuses is that he was simply too polite in the past, which is why he missed President Biden's very public mental decline. And he also accuses Trump of not being transparent. And now he's saying that Trump is not transparent about his health records. How hilarious is that? Joe Biden, who didn't get tested for, what is it, the certain type of cancer since 2014. Now he's trying to point fingers at Trump for not being transparent about his records. But this is Jake Tapper on, CNN, trying to make the case to the American people. Because, whenever these people are talking with these panels, they're really not talking to these panels. They're trying to talk to the American people to convince them of certain things. Trying to make the case for the American people that there is a possibility in which liberal mainstream media could have somehow missed Joe Biden's mental decline. Because if the media missed Joe Biden's mental decline, you got to realize they're not culpable. They weren't outright lying to the public. If you simply miss something or don't see something, it's not your fault. So that's what he's trying to do here. He's trying to manipulate the public into somehow thinking that these leftist news outlets did not know, even though it was obvious. Take a look.
That's cabinet secretaries.
Interesting. How has writing this important book, Investigating the Biden Presidency, Jake, informed you about how to cover the current president?
Well, I just think in general, not Trump specific, but in general, I think that the press corps, and I'm certainly including myself, needs to worry less about politeness when it comes to these health issues and needs to be even more aggressive when it comes to demanding transparency on health issues when it comes to the president. President Trump, while he appears healthy, he has not been transparent about his health records. And I think that that's something that the American people have a right to.
You want to add something?
Yeah, I think, listen, this is not the first time this has happened. Woodrow Wilson, FDR, JFK all hid significant medical failings.
So, that point is kind of true. Presidents generally, if I can say the word, they want to appear more healthy than they are. But there's a big problem when you can no longer hide it. What happens? You quickly realize who are the liars and who are the ones telling the truth. And with Joe Biden, it was more obvious than ever. And this is just one of the tours, the media tours that Jake Tapper went on. He went on MSNBC, he went on podcasts. And I think this is a perfect example of what exactly Jake Tapper is trying to do while going on these podcasts and these liberal mainstream media outlets. What I believe Jake Tapper is trying to do, other than sell his book, I believe he is trying to kill two birds with one stone here. he is trying to sell his book, trying to make money, shill his book. But at the same time, he is trying to claw back some type of credibility to these liberal media outlets. And he's doing this in a way where he's trying to get the audience to latch onto this idea that somehow, like I said earlier, these media hosts, there is a reality where they did not recognize Joe Biden's mental decline. For instance, here, I'm going to play this for you, where Jake Tapper is talking about Joe Scarborough and the fact that Joe Biden wanted to go on Morning Joe to try to convince Joe Scarborough that he was sharp. And he goes on to say, basically, Joe Scarborough was so convinced, he turned around and he told his audience, F you if you can't handle the truth. Joe Biden is cogent. He is sharper than he's ever been. This is kind of the case that he makes on this MSNBC panel, which of course he's trying to make it. He's trying to plant that seed of doubt in the audience mind that maybe Joe Scarborough didn't see Joe Biden as having mental decline. Maybe Joe Biden actually convinced Joe Scarborough that he was actually cogent and sharp.
In your specific case, Joe, our reporting indicates that Joe Biden, who, as you know, is a frequent viewer of the show, saw when David Ignatius wrote that column in, I think, August 2023, saying that Joe Biden should not run for re-election because of what he had been hearing. Right. And he came on this show, and you guys had a robust conversation about this. You largely agreed that you'd been hearing things about this, but that there was really no alternative, that Kamala Harris was not up to the job. That's what Democrats were telling you behind the scenes. Joe Biden saw that. Joe Biden said to staffers that he wanted to convince you that you were wrong. And he focused on you like you were a constituency, like you were farmers in Iowa, like you were the Kiwanis Club in New Hampshire. And he made sure that you thought differently. He made sure that you thought differently. I think he did this with a couple people.
Wait, so you're telling me, Jake Tapper, you're telling me that Joe Biden watched Morning Joe and he said, you know what? I'm going to go on Morning Joe and convince Joe Scarborough that I am sharp and I am up for the task, just like I would go to Iowa and convince all these farmers that I am the right candidate. Jake Tapper, see, this is what they're doing. They're performing here. Jake Tapper wants the audience to believe here that Joe Scarborough got tricked by Joe Biden. That's what they want the audience to believe. So this is what I mean. Jake Tapper is using this media tour. He's trying to kill two birds with one stone. Sell his book, at the same time plant that seed of doubt in his audience, in the audience mind, that, oh, maybe it isn't quite a ridiculous idea to think that these media hosts didn't see Joe Biden's mental decline. As if Joe Scarborough doesn't have a X account, doesn't have a Twitter account. It's completely insane, but that doesn't matter because people forget the past very quickly. Just like this last video I'll play for you of Jake Tapper completely contradicting himself from 2023 to 2025. This is another podcast he went on where he talks about Hunter Biden and just how much of a role Hunter Biden had in Biden's administration. I think most of us know that Hunter Biden had a huge role in Biden's administration, which is insane because that basically means we had a crackhead running our country for several years. But this is Jake Tapper talking about the Hunter Biden problem from 2023 to 2025. Take a listen.
There's no evidence to support the allegation my father was financially involved in my business because it did not happen. There's no fairness or decency in what these Republicans are doing. And I do have to say, whatever you think of Hunter Biden, and there's certainly a lot of people in this town, Democrats and Republicans, that do not think a lot of him, there is a certain kind of cruelty to the campaign against him. Where is Hunter? Where is Hunter? Where is Hunter? Hunter was driving the decision making for the family in a way that he was almost like a chief of staff of the family.
Does that strike you as pretty bizarre?
It's bizarre because I think he is provably, demonstrably unethical, sleazy, and prone to horrible decisions. I mean,
tell me how you really feel.
Well, I mean,
so very, very interesting, right? He has one opinion before Joe Biden was voted out of office, and now he has a completely different opinion. Seems to be much more forthcoming now that Joe Biden is no longer in office. It's almost as if the existence of a certain political figure in office completely changes these people's opinion at the time. Does that make any sense? I did say I had one. That was the last video, but I actually have one more video for you. Another way of trying to manipulate the audience into thinking that it is somehow in the realm of possibility that these media pundits could have thought that Joe Biden was not cognitively impaired to the point where he shouldn't be president. This is another excuse that he uses. He says that Biden's aides struggled to detect his decline because he always seemed cognitively weak. You know, I think there is a line that Biden crossed. I get that, you know, we have public figures that they have these gaffes and they have these funny moments. And we've had them, you know, we've had, I think the best example of this is probably George W. Bush. He had a lot of gaffes. Joe Biden is another example of this. Joe Biden always said funny things, but, you know, there is a point in which it crosses over from being just normal gaffes to being like, okay, there's something going on here. And it's not I don't think it's a fine line at all. I think with Joe Biden, it was a giant chasm to where there is no way you could have thought what he was doing was simply gaffes. Falling off his bike, tripping over stairs, stumbling over his words. He would have this one thing where sometimes he would have these in the middle of a speech. He would have like an outburst. He would say a word really loud, which is really weird. He would forget where he was going. He would wander to one side of the stage. He would constantly be having to be led around by aides. You know, it's like the culmination of all these things. It's like these things are not just gaffes anymore. This is Joe Biden getting very, very old. But Jake Tapper tries to lead the audience to believe, this is Sam Harris, his podcast, tries to lead the audience to believe that somehow the aides, Biden's aides and media pundits didn't catch this because Joe Biden's always been he's always been prone to gaffes, gaffe prone. Take a listen.
I've known of him since the 80s. And he's always been gaffe prone, long-winded, says inappropriate things. Like, that's always been him.
Yeah.
And so
smelling people's hair. I mean, who knows what's going on?
That whole creepy little section was its own thing.
Yeah.
But that's always, so that some aides said to us that during this era when the non-functioning Biden would rear its head, 2019, 2020, and then he would show up more and more, non-functioning Biden, that they weren't sure what was going on because A, he was old, and that just happens with older people. They lose a beat. B, he was always kind of prone to some of this behavior, even when he was in fighting form, you know, long-winded, pointless stories, and forgetting names and such, gaffes, lies, all those things. So that, again, that doesn't exculpatory. It's not exculpatory, but it is by way of understanding, like, the complication of trying to figure out, wait, what exactly is going on here with.
And, you know, like I said, he's this whole media tour, these podcasts, all he's trying to do is at the very least create an argument for how Joe Biden's cognitive decline could have been missed. There is a possibility out here in the realm of possibilities that all of these different media personalities, and not just media personalities, but his aides, could have missed this. Well, let me ask you this. How did you guys miss it, but tens of millions of average Americans saw it and talked about it almost on a daily basis? In my opinion, I don't think it's even an opinion. In reality, these other people, they just lied. They lied because I think it's obvious their guy was in office. It's very beneficial to have someone in office who is barely not even there. When you have an auto pin that signs bills and orders and directives and all these other things, That's very beneficial because now you don't have one guy, making this decision. It's like a free for all. Now they're saying some of these bills and these pardons that were signed by this auto pin could have been someone that was taking bribes in order for other people to have access to this auto pin. So I think it was just very beneficial to this side of the aisle, to where they wanted to run potentially Joe Biden again. So they carried water for him. They carried water because they thought that maybe there was a realm of possibility where Joe Biden could win a second time through whatever, nefarious methods that they used. And they could censor people into oblivion about what they were actually doing with, voting and mail-in voting and whatnot. And once they got Joe Biden at least pushed past the finish line, it wouldn't matter anymore. But that whole debate, there was still the reality that people wanted to see the candidate, and they wanted to see the candidates debate. That would have just been way too weird, is not allowing the candidates to debate. That would have just been way too weird even for post-COVID Americans. And that was like the inflection point where this all blew up in the faces. It was a house of cards to begin with. And now we have Jake Tapper trying to make this media tour and try to manipulate the American people into thinking that somehow they knew about this, or somehow they never saw this. Somehow the media, the professional media, the professional noticers, the people who are paid to notice, paid to pay attention, they missed it. And I think this is just really a slap in the face to every American. This is exactly what the media thinks of you. They think that you're stupid. It's just the plain honest facts. But what do you guys think? What do you think of Jake Tapper making this media tour? Let me know down below what you think. Like and subscribe to the channel. I'd really appreciate it. But until then, I'll see you on the next one.